Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the session today. We have a very interesting mix of speakers. And let me start off with a quick round of introductions, and maybe starting with me. I'm Charu. I'm part of the Omidyar network in India, and I lead our work in governance and citizen engagement. And as part of this broader initiative, a few years back, we kind of partnered with CIE to kind of see how we could catalyze the civic tech space and help establish the Citizen Innovation Lab. And as part of the activities within the lab, a while back, we had published a report which kind of tried to do the landscape of the civic tech space. And now we're kind of following up with many more activities such as this discussion, but also hackathons, etc. We're really kind of trying to see how we can do more and get more people to think about this space. Today, we have a very, very interesting mix of panelists with us, both across people who are actually in the thicks with it as investors and entrepreneurs, but also people who are kind of looking at it more from an ecosystem perspective of what are the different pieces moving together. And with that, let me invite the panelists to introduce themselves. So let's start with Jaya.
Thank you so much, Charu. Very glad to be here. I'm Jaya Dinda, and I'm the Director of Urban Development at World Resources Institute, India. This is a research organization. It's a global research organization which does extensive work in cities and outside of cities on, making places sustainable and basically economically viable. And as part of the work that I do at WRI, innovation is a big portfolio. And looking at urban services, innovation in urban services specifically relating to mobility, wastewater energy systems. And we have been actually working with several startups since 2013, pretty much looking at how to kind of reinvent the space and what kind of business models are working, and mainly how to scale innovation through government processes, because those are sort of our main partners in the work that we do. So very happy to be here. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jaya. Malika?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I'm Malika. I lead the work at Urban and Civic Tech and Social Alpha. And we are a technology business incubator. We have been supporting innovations, early stage innovations in multiple sectors across civic tech for the past couple of years. Currently, we are working with innovations across waste, water sanitation, air pollution, mobility, GovTech, sustainable consumption, all moving towards a consolidated goal of climate action. Our model is really very interesting because not only do we, enable ecosystem development across, government stakeholders, but also enable, startups and early stage innovations to build sustainable revenue models across other different, industry as well as customer segments. And of course, support them in their go-to-market journey. So it has been an interesting growth journey in the past couple of years, and happy to interact with all of you.
Thank you, Malika. And if I may invite Manas now.
Hi everyone. Hi Charu. Thanks for inviting me here. So I'm Manas Rath. I recently founded Leap Cities, which stands for Leadership, Excellence, and Partnership for Cities. Our goal is very simple. It is to improve the quality of living of all 500 million odd urban Indians. We do this by helping to build businesses and non-profit organizations that provide services and develop technologies to improve urban quality of life. So that's sustainability as well as various things. We are closing our first cohort of participants right now. So we work with growth stage enterprises, not very early stage. And we provide them long-term, so 3 to 5 years of high quality and intense management support, across various functions, from sales and marketing to fundraising to strategy, to internal operations, manufacturing, and so on. Through a very strong team of advisors as well as our in-house team. I also work with Borda, which is a non-profit organization focused on wastewater treatment and reuse. So I've been working on the water side for about 6-7 years now, and waste management. And I'm also leading the India activities, or I'm helping the India activities of the Take a Stake Fund, which is an impact investment fund focused on water and sanitation and waste management. and we're expecting to close our first investment early next year. So these are the few things I'm up to, and it's very nice to be here.
Thank you, Manas. Hi, Rashi. Can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rashi Agrawal. I'm the Director of Business Development and Sales at Banyan Nation. We're a circular economy plastics recycling company based in Hyderabad. We basically work with thousands of informal sector workers from whom we collect post-consumer plastics, and then we recycle it at our facility here, which has a capacity to recycle about 500 tons per month of this plastics, and we sell it to major brands that use it in their packaging and products. So some of the big ones are like Surf Excel and Dettol that use our recycled polymer in their packaging, just as a part of their supply chain now. And basically, our sort of engagement with the civic tech space is more around waste management. So we got here by building, a two-pronged solution to recycling. One was on the supply chain side, where we integrate a lot of informal sector workers using a software platform, a data intelligence software platform. And we realized as we were building it that has a lot of applications for waste management in general and for other recycling activities other than ours as well. So using that, we sort of engaged with a lot of cities whom we modified our platform a little bit. Like, for example, the city of Varanasi, with the help of Renew Oceans, used it to understand the flow of plastics into the Ganga. We used it to study the flow of plastics into the Adyar and Kubam rivers in Chennai, as well as understand the entire waste management in the city of Warangal, and understand e-waste management in the city of Hyderabad, and so on. So we've had a few civic sector applications to our private sector work as well. So that's what we do at Banyan Nation, and I'm sure we'll talk more about our work later in the panel as well.
Thank you. And I think maybe to start with the question we are kind of all here thinking about is how can civic tech startups create scalable business models? And I think as the panelists spoke about, you kind of got some hints of how organizations are thinking about it. But maybe just to start the conversation, I think this is a question for both Jaya and Rashi. Is a more traditional business model in the civic tech space has been kind of selling to the government or the government as a buyer. In your experience, what has been how has this business model really played out, and have you seen this maybe evolve in the last few years? And maybe Jay, you could go first, and Rashi after that.
Sure. Thanks, Charu. So I think the traditional selling that you're talking about, and the business models have obviously evolved depending on what kind of a service you're providing. And startups are typically in the civic tech space. They're in two parts of the spectrum. One is where they're supporting government in achieving operational efficiency or service delivery. The other part is where they're supporting citizens, access businesses or access opportunities and governance and participation. Now, typically, we found that startups which are, there are three really models which are emerging, right? So there's the OPEX, CAPEX, and a hybrid sort of a model. And essentially what we found is, through the startups we have engaged with, that there is a need to not have just one business model, not just for government, but also for your other consumers and other customers. Because basically the CAPEX model is heavy on the upfront cost, which governments may or may not be able to pay, or there's this willingness to pay question. So that needs to be thought through. On the OPEX model, when you're taking in businesses as services, when you're taking in solutions as services, that is somewhere where you have to determine a cost, and then the government has to also determine what kind of risks they are being exposed to. Is it a vetted solution? Does it have pilots? Does it have other customers that they can speak to, find out more about? And so the risk is somewhat reduced, and then because it is a service contract, they're more willing to take it on. And there are also hybrid models. For example, in energy, there are hybrid models of both CAPEX and OPEX, working together. What we've also found is that, startups which are focused on, say, selling software to government, for example, find it easier to scale, especially if there is capacity on the side of the government to absorb those kind of softwares. And, there's digital capacity on the side of the government. The other thing is that, when you're looking at different types of sort of licensing subscription models, SaaS models do really well. Software is a solution that does quite well. Consulting does not scale very easily, but is worth exploring. And like I said, the willingness to pay, especially on the government part, plays a big role. And it's also very important to sort of have the right competencies on the team if you're going to engage in the consulting model. There is also the corporate partnership model that we found, which many people opt for only because, not only, but also because, the reporting processes, for example, are less onerous. But you have to kind of choose your partners carefully and, be aware of any kind of reputational risks that may be involved with, partnering with a certain corporate. There's also the advertising model, limited potential mostly for civic tech space, and especially if the recall value is not very strong for a brand, then you might struggle. There's the other one which is kind of looking up a lot is the data monetizing. But with that there is the user data privacy concerns, and a lot of startups, they opt not to do that just because it compromises their ability to connect with their consumers and customer base. And then, of course, there are the philanthropic dollars. So you have, different philanthropies and HNIs and others who are, willing to give you multi-year unrestricted funding. And a lot of them are not. They're still kind of treading the space very carefully. But there are some who are willing to do that. And, that is one space which is evolving. So it is basically a mix of revenue plus philanthropic money, which we are seeing coming into the civic tech space.
And Rasha, how has your experience been?
Yeah, I think Jaya already covered a lot of, the different types of models that work. And I think we fall in a subset of what she just pointed out. So for one, a hybrid model of government as one of your customers and not relying on government to be your only customer is definitely a much more practical approach, especially for startups. You can, if you're a big company, perhaps you can get away with government being, significant percentage of your revenues. Also, because there is uncertainty around, payment cycles, terms, things like that. So I think it's always better from a practical standpoint to have a model that is more hybrid in nature, which sells to both the private sector as well as the government. Also, what we've learned over the past 6-7 years of being in this space is that often government as a buyer does not know what it wants. So there's a lot of education around that. So I think we have to find a way as startups to build that as a part of our cost structure, is all that education that we do in terms of selling, because mostly we're working with solutions that haven't been done before. If you're a startup, we're mostly working with these innovative solutions that don't go through the government tendering systems and such, right? So there has to be a creative way to factor that into your cost structure, your revenue model, bake that into your timelines as well, right? So I think definitely this working with what we call a latent demand for often these products and services is challenging. But like I said, if you can find a different buyer until government comes on board, is the most practical approach that we've found in this sector.
Interesting. And I think maybe a question for us to later is how could startups navigate the complexity, right? Like figuring out one business model can be hard enough, but when we start thinking of two. But maybe before we go that, I think it'd be great to kind of hear from Manas and Malika a little bit about, what are some of these hybrid models, right? What are these, modes in government models that we are seeing, especially, in places where we're thinking of citizens as the user, right? So a lot of civic tech kind of focuses on citizens and improving transparency. So we first Malika and then Manas.
Sure. So thank you, Charu. So yeah, I think both Jaya and Rashi have laid the landscape out really well. In fact, also elucidated a lot on the hybrid models that currently, startups are really adopting. So I want to sort of pick on one portion of the discussion that had happened before, which is the corporate partnerships, which at Social Alpha we have enabled startups to explore, and particularly how we see it as is market linkages, and we believe that some of these industries are always looking for solutions. They are looking to improve their processes, they're looking to improve their supply chains, they are looking to maximize output, whichever sector they are working in, whether they're looking at water, whether looking at infrastructure, construction, or are looking at sectors like mobility. So it might actually be very useful for these startups to really sort of integrate with the existing business solutions that are already being provided, only because one of the key challenges that startups face is on the procurement side, which is usually a very lengthy process, and like Rashi had explained, the sales cycle is really extremely long. So to really sort of I think this is sort of a near-term solution to sort of circumvent this particular challenge. Of course, the government, is constantly revamping the whole procurement system. They're looking at, how they can ease it for startups, how, product-driven startups can, really apply on the GEM portal, and, all of the entire procurement can be eased out. Particularly data-driven startups can actually see a lot of use cases within industry as well, on the, process optimization side, as well as, a lot of product-driven solutions can also, really sit upon existing business solutions and, cater to government and scale. Pick on this particular model, which I think is a very interesting model that startups can explore. Of course, besides that, I think the B2C segment happens to be, an extremely critical segment. So looking at how you can monetize, your solution with the customer segment, particularly for citizen-facing apps, becomes really very important. So I think startups really need to have a very strong business plan, also make, alternate revenue streams in terms of B2B channels. So really aggregating whether they can, sell their solutions to particularly, research and data-driven startups. Can they actually sell their solutions to a research entity? Are they looking at selling it to an industry? And we have seen that in, startups who are, monitoring air data. So can they actually, collate this data, and whether a research institution can actually, pay, the willingness to pay for this data, like, Jaya mentioned, might exist more with these organizations rather than probably directly with the government or with a single user per se. So definitely see a wide spread of different models being applied by different organizations. As an investor, I think primarily I would like to highlight a couple of things which Sujaya sort of touched upon very broadly. But some of the risk mitigation efforts could be really for startups to look at non-dilutive grants in the beginning. So this is the stage where they are really looking at developing their product and finding the right customers. So when you are really looking at the diverse customer base, but your biggest customer is the government, but the willingness to pay is low. So really looking at that early stage, what kind of grants will help you validate the product on ground. The other kind of models that our startups are looking to engage with are a mix of equity and debt. So these models really work very well because some of these organizations have capex cost, high capex cost, and high opex cost. So they usually struggle with a lot of working capital, and that is where to make that really strong case with your B2G partners, having those pilots and working in hybrid format of equity and debt can really help you make that case and build your solution very effectively. One very interesting model that is also coming across is the revenue-based financing model. And these are for startups which are just, starting to commercialize and have started gaining some revenues, and to, sort of gain that wider base amongst different kind of customer segments. They can really, sort of cash in on the revenues that they are able to, generate to, scale into government markets. And that's only because, the sales cycle is longer, and, you really do not know how you would like to sustain your team for a longer period of time and your operations. So just wanted to highlight, this one bit from an investor lens, what startups can really look for and early stage innovators, because this is something that can help them when they start diversifying towards these hybrid models.
Thank you, Malika. That was very useful. And maybe I can bring in Manas now.
Sure, thanks, Charu. So one of the things I look at is a 2x2 kind of matrix, right? So you look at your customer, and you've got, let's say, low-income customers at the lower end, and then you've got high-income customers, right? And then on the x-axis, you look at what is the extent of government involvement or engagement in your business model. So the right side, you can plot high government engagement, which means you're selling to the government, or it's a highly regulated kind of sector. And at the low end of government engagement is where you're basically selling to businesses and consumers, and there's almost no or very little government involvement there. I think a business model really needs to match what you do. Depends also on who you are, in the sense of not in terms of the mission or the intent, but what resources do you have, what experience, what networks do you have, also what capital you have. So I think each company addressing the same problem may need to go about in a different way, depending on where they are at and what resources they have at their disposal, right? But just thinking about this gives you a sense. I mean, there are many companies who start off with a very strong, we want to serve the base of the pyramid, but we're not going to have cash to see it through, and then we're going to be dependent on everyone. And I say, look, go and serve a different customer base, make your money off them, make sure that it's like an airplane, right? First put the oxygen mask on yourself, then help others. And you need to look at that, as a founder. I think it's very important to be responsible and thoughtful about how to design the model. Now, with regard to, seeing a lot of interesting models, of course, you look at how do you balance, government, businesses, and consumers. Of course, they all require different sales approaches, different capabilities, and you can't run after all three if you're a small organization in the early days. So you may have to prioritize, but you want to, maybe try and work across different customer segments, not just the high income, low income, but these three types, to find what really works for you, and then when you might want to pivot from one to the other. As you get more comfortable, more established, you might have a chance to make your impact in different ways. So maybe trying to go for the government on day one may not be a great idea, both because you may not have the credibility and the payment cycles, the business development, sort of process is very different. So you get established somewhere else, and then you move on to the government. And I've seen that quite well. I've seen companies, especially the waste management space, who've got good technology. Then they partner with one of those old-time contractor kind of firms who know how to win the contracts. But then this company comes and says, look, we'll provide the service, we'll provide the technology, we'll build it. You manage all the payments, however you need to do it, just pay us for our stuff. And I've seen a few, especially in waste management and wastewater, companies able to do these sort of partnership with bigger established players who understand the system, but they're still able to do their thing with their ethics and their processes in a very clean way. I think the hybrid annuity model is something that the government has been using to defer their cost and also make sure that the service provider is engaged for a long period of time. And basically what you do is, if it's going to cost you 100 rupees to build a system, the government will pay the installer, pay the company 40 or 50, and the remaining 50 will be added to a O&M, the operation and maintenance contract, which may last 5 to 15 years, maybe even 20 years. And they've been doing this with roads, and now they're doing it with water, wastewater treatment and waste management systems. One could look at a similar agreement with your customers. As a startup, you may not be able to completely go with product as a service because you need the revenue. But if you get enough, if you have some investors or loans, if you have support with your vendors, then you can say, okay, look, don't pay me the full cost of the product, but it's not fully as a service. You pay me 50% now, and the rest you add on to And a lot of solar energy companies were able to do that quite well and reach a certain scale where later they might be able to completely absorb the cost of the initial installation on their balance sheet and only charge a recurring fee to the customer, maybe link it to upsides or value creation. If you're saving the customer money, you capture a part of that saving as part of your revenue, right? So those are, depending on the kind of relationships you have with customers, you can play around with some of those things. I think, some of the other things, creating byproducts that are saleable. I mean, especially the waste sector and sewage, people say, oh, there is, and I think Rashi may chuckle at this, there is, there is gold in shit and there is gold in waste. I'm like, dude, where's the gold, right? Maybe you can earn a little bit of money out of it. Maybe you can kind of eke out, a small profit somewhere, which is, subsistence level, this thing. But every incremental bit of revenue can help sometimes, and therefore to look at how do their advertising, your sale of byproducts, how do all these things add up into your business model is, I think, useful to consider. When I work with companies, we look at 6 sources of financing broadly. You've got equity, debt, and grants, and then you've got revenue development. And the faster you can get paying customers, the better off you are. You've got channel finance. So if you've got vendors, dealers, franchisee, you can get some advance financing out of them. And then your vendor financing, especially if you're manufacturing stuff, if you can get good vendors, maybe big companies who are helping you to break into a niche market, and you can get great credit terms from them, that adds to your cash flow, and that's a great way to go. I'll just give one more example, which was interesting. Another company I was involved in starting with a blue water company, and we work in sanitation and fecal sludge management. We got a call from the Ladakh municipality saying, we have a groundwater pollution problem. Can FSM help us? We traveled out there. We said, yes, it can. They said, look, to get a budget approval for this project, it was like 1 crore rupees, right? But it's going to take 4 months to get budget approval. By then the season is over. We'll have to implement it only next year. By the time you finish construction, that year is also over. So we lose 2 years, right? And we spoke to the hotel owners and the commercial customers there. And we said, look, we're going to charge you a fee. So it's a PPP, but we're going to charge you a fee which covers the cost of the service and the cost of the capex. And you pay the municipality. When we provide the service, the municipality pays us 90% of the fee. So municipality has invested 0 money upfront. They retain 10% of the revenue, and we generate a revenue stream by servicing the customer. But instead of relying upon the municipality to pay us, which is always can be challenging, we get the end user to pay us, but through the municipality. And that was an interesting way to structure a PPP, where we had visibility on revenue. The customers knew what they were getting. The municipality jumped right in because they had nothing to put up front, they had nothing to lose, and it's been working very nicely for 4 years now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and then last I'll just say, I think as startups, the name of the new venture that we started is called LEAP. It's Leadership, Excellence, and Partnership. That's because we believe that partnership is critical to solve problems, but you are not a good partner if you don't pursue excellence. And I think whether you're a startup or a growth stage or a big company, I think pursuing excellence is absolutely critical to become a successful business. We don't see enough of that. But to pursue excellence, you need that level 5 leadership at all levels of your organization. So I think, getting the basic DNA right is absolutely important, and then figuring out how you have the staying power to see yourself through to success and profitability and impact, I think becomes the second most important question to address.
Right. No, thank you, Manas. And I think people listening to us, please drop in your questions in the chat and we can pick it up. But I think just questions from this very interesting discussion. So there's a bit of a consensus in the panel in saying don't depend on one revenue stream. But for an organization, it can be really challenging, right? Because a lot of people attracted to the sector or coming in are actually trying to solve, like they're coming with the impact lens. And sometimes that balance of, if I'm going to move away from my impact focus, am I moving away from my impact focus if I'm looking at other revenue streams? And I think maybe you can start with Jaya and Malika, and just, what you think are maybe some ideas or ways that startups can kind of think through this, right? As they look to diversify, what are some of the challenges they can expect? What can be some ways of kind of thinking through that when they think about, diversifying, of looking at different revenue streams or looking at different customers? Jaya, maybe you could start with you.
Sure, and I'll try to speak to a particular customer, right? So I'll speak to government, for example, and what are the challenges that they can encounter there. I mean, one is, and what we've also experienced through some of the companies and, the Civic labs that WRI hosted was that, there is a bit of a reluctance to pivot on your business model many times. It's because, you're one thing, you become attached to it, or, you feel like that's working. And so you may not want to try, another model and, kind of do that. But I think with government, it becomes very important because, I mean, one, they have a completely prescriptive tendering process. So when you are looking at procurement, the processes are fairly complex, stringent qualification criteria, which are difficult for MSMEs to meet, like earnest deposit, years of experience, profitability, which many of them are not at that point there. And also, especially for nascent startups, it becomes a huge, challenge when these prerequisites are there, unless they partner with a corporate entity. There's also the challenge of, the government is looking for a detailed scope of work with technical specifications very clearly spelled out up front. And first-time innovators are losing out on that because they either lack the IPR or have compulsions about, sharing commercially viable proprietary information. So that becomes another challenge. The other thing is on, the governance structures. So especially when you're looking at things like waste, water, energy, the different aspects of all of these sectors, they fall under the purview of multiple ministries and departments, and even at the city level. And then these multiple departments and level of governments are confusing to external stakeholders. And, there's this general sense of lack of ownership and agency, overlapping mandates and, departments passing the buck, which can leave startups very confused about, where they fit in, what their role is. It's also compounded by sort of the rotation of bureaucrats, when they are they've already pitched to one bureaucrat and they've got a pilot, for example, in place, and then they're now getting into the contracting process, and that person leaves, then that whole process has to start again. And this is a big deterrent. And then, adding to this is the lack of transparency and accountability, which discourages a lot of participation. The other thing is, going back to the risk-taking ability, right? So most public sector agencies want to work with systems and business models which they already know of, which they are comfortable with, and which are already in place to optimize for cost efficiency. And so there's a reluctance to undertake any risk associated with innovation or the need to overhaul legacy systems for new solutions to be embedded. And so, therefore, the government is also many times reluctant to experiment with new business models. I think the one that Manas mentioned is a great one. And in fact, this has been applied to not just, waste sector, but, metro systems, a lot of other services as well, which, different cities in India have experimented with, and it's great. But I think there needs to be that leadership to take on something like that. And also, I think one of the main things that we often overlook is that there's a lack of comprehensive legal framework. So, when we're talking about policies, there's poor policy implementation. The awareness is very low about the schemes that exist. And if you look around just in the space of, MSMEs, and especially with in relation to civic tech or service delivery, there are over 50 plus policies that the government has put out. But when you talk to startups, there's very little awareness. There's also no word of mouth sort of translation of this knowledge because, again, there's a limiting qualifying criteria. There's poor implementation of the schemes. There are some startups we found are very clever. They've been able to combine certain schemes and use them. But then, of course, there is the long procurement cycle and the wait in terms of, payments, which you then also have to put up with. So I think there are many kind of challenges when you talk about kind of onboarding different types of business models. There's also the challenge of capacity and the capacity on the part of the government, and also in terms of, being able to disseminate information. And so I think one of the ways in which a lot of the startups, at least in our cohorts, have been able to break that is to first do the proof of concept or do a pilot demonstration for the government, fine tune their concept based on what the government requires, and then figure out, how to scale and how to kind of approach the RFP process. So yeah, and then, there are these platforms like the government e-marketplace, the GEM portal, which is there, which hasn't received a lot of traction. But it is available in many Indian languages and has expanded its reach significantly in the last couple of months. And so there are these kind of portals which are available so that startups can engage with certain entities and explore different kind of business models as well. And also, I think the last point that I'll make is that especially during the pandemic, I think what people realized is that, for acquiring services related to health or products related to healthcare and, everything that states and cities needed, there was a lot of experimentation which happened, like in Odisha, in Kerala, in Karnataka, many places, Maharashtra. A lot of experimentation happened around different types of business models, around different types of procurement processes. And then now the thought is that, if it can work for health, why can't it work for basic services? Why can't it work for, the other things that we kind of need to ensure quality of life and healthy cities and healthy residents? And so one of the things to look at, and especially that government has become comfortable with, is, experimenting a little bit and going out of their way to, see that, if it can work for health, then can it be translated for other services? I'll stop there.
Thank you. Malika.
Thanks, Jaya. I think Jaya has covered most of it, but I just want to take a very different lens to how we look at it. At least within Social Alpha, I think she's covered most of the ecosystem challenges that most of the startups face. But I think, taking from your question, Charu, I think startups which are particularly thinking about impact, I think they really need to, sort of go back to the whiteboard and, really drill down on the fact about which kind of customer that they are actually serving. I think, and I'm particularly talking about early stage innovations here. So in their entire lab to market journey. So this is critically for those who have not really identified their markets yet. And they're really in their, field tests. They are really testing their products out. They're making those product iterations. I think the kind of challenges they face right now is not the B2G market at all. So the B2G market should be really looked at for scale. So if they're really looking at impact, I think the first thing that they need to do is identify their customer. And, I would just go back to the example of our startup. Very recently we also happened to touch base with them, Takachar, and they came to us at a very early stage when they were mostly a lab project, and later on moved towards their working prototype. And what they particularly needed support, and at all points of time, was the ecosystem of research and development, in terms of labs, in terms of certifications, also to keenly identify the customer. So their customer happens to be the farmer. Is the farmer going to take such a product? What is the kind of output the product gives? Are there other financing models for the product? How can we subsidize that product for single farmer in a particular farmland, wherever their location is? And I'm giving this example which couple of many startups do face this. So I would just say before they start looking at government as a customer to start scaling up, it is really important to first face these challenges and see how they can really navigate across them. And that is where I think early stage ecosystems like yours, like Social Alpha, really play a very important role in terms of bringing together the right ecosystem for research and development, connecting to the larger, wider innovation ecosystem like the IITs and the IISCs, or and the researchers, of course, and at the same time providing them actual support in terms of hardware testing. And this could also be the case. Of course, pilots also happen to be one form of testing. So any sort of service-driven models, and probably Rashi can add on to that, does require extensive validation on the ground. So really, another model is to work with probably civil society and philanthropy to deploy those solutions on the ground. So they do happen to be that short-term customer before you can start thinking of scale. So I know that entrepreneurs are thinking about impact. They're talking about how they are really going to make that difference in the world. And yes, government can provide that impact. It can provide the scale that needs to be done, because some of these sectors are keenly managed by different government departments. But before you get into all of the challenges that Jaya listed out, it's really important to sort of consolidate and see what are the kind of revenue models we want to follow, and can we really diversify, because philanthropy is also on the ground. Philanthropy is always looking for solution. We also partner with a lot of philanthropic organizations to deploy solution on ground for the kind of market access that startups startups need in that lab to market journey. And they can go from 0 to 1 within the lab ecosystem, from 1 to 100 with the larger philanthropic civil society ecosystem, from 100 to 1,000 and 10,000 with the government ecosystem. So to be there between the 0 to 100, I think it's really important to work with those different customer bases to actually identify the challenges, iterate on your product, and come up with the right product which the government will easily procure, because government is always looking for, say, I need 100 machines, I'm going to put out a tender for 100 machines or 200, and not any less than that, because that's what we have been hearing about, whether it's through the GEM portal, which is currently, like Jaya mentioned, still requires a lot of sensitization. It requires wide scale use and uptake, but at the same time any process requires a large scale order, and to for a startup to feel confident that they can deliver this order, they need to be confident in their lab to market journey. So I would just like to add this lens for the kind of things that startup could think about when they start thinking about scale and impact.
And I think that's a very, very interesting framing, like kind of almost thinking of it as different legs of the journey, and not really kind of starting with the end. And I think with that, it might be actually very interesting to hear from Rashi on how their journey was before they actually made it to the government. How were they thinking about these pivots? What was the ecosystem support you had, or you hoped that the company had, that from an investor perspective, from a philanthropy perspective, like I pointed out some around just R&D, etc. And be kind of actually great to hear from both Rashi and Manas in terms of before we can call them growth stage, or before as organizations are ready on their scale journey, what is that ecosystem that can sort of help them think through these pivots, and how can it be more supportive?
Yeah. So for us, what was most helpful? One thing I would, just add to what Jaya and Malika already said. I think as startups, we have to be flexible around our mindset of the problem that we're trying to solve, right? So I think it's easier said, than done, and easier so still in waste management, because the beneficiary may be other people who may still be willing to pay for the service or the product that you have, whereas it may not be so clear cut in other things, especially when you're working with, let's say, the public water system, or toilets or sanitation and things like that, right? So I take that feedback and that caveat, but I think so even when Banyan started, we wanted to do waste management as a whole, so we bid for city contracts, and quickly realized that this was not something a startup should be doing, because of the complexities around tendering processes, I don't even want to get into the unsaid things. So basically, we realized very quickly that this is not a space where startups should be working. So then, as a startup, we did some soul searching and said, hey, this is the problem we want to solve. How else can we solve it, right? So if we want to tackle waste management as a whole, where can we start, right? So I think it's also important. I think we take ourselves as startups too seriously in wanting to solve all the world's problems at once. I think if we have the self-realization to know that I can maybe solve this one problem and then build from there, right, and do more. I think from our perspective, that's been a more practical approach, and that's a learning we had very early on in our journey. The resources that have helped us, definitely being in Telangana, it's a state that's very supportive of startups, right from also the procurement system, for example. So they have a policy where startups incubated by the T-Hub, which is the state incubator, can directly pitch for a project totaling up to $200,000 in value without going through the tendering system. And if the government thinks that adds value, then they don't have to go through the tendering system, right? And that's helped. I mean, we've been direct beneficiaries of that policy, so I can say that it works, right? It's worked for a couple of other startups that we know of that have been able to pilot their technology and pilot their product with the state as their first customer, right? So if more states were to come forward and put up those innovation funds and things like that, where you can easily have startups as your first customer, government as your first customer as a startup. I think that really helps a lot of startups like us. Other than that, just the ecosystem support, right? So, and ecosystem is not just having incubators, accelerators, etc., but also having other startups in the space, right? Now, most people see that as competition. I see that as validation, that we are in the right place at the right time, right? That it is a problem that I'm not the only crazy thinking about, right? It's a problem that a lot of people are thinking about, and we want to collectively solve it, right? So having that, I guess, that hand-holding, that collaboration across startups as well, I think is something where then the government starts to take notice, right, as well. And maybe not enough, because waste management is still not classified as an industry by the government, even even when the ecosystem is so vibrant as of now in India. But I think I'm seeing that, because when we were the only lone soldier in this sector, in this state, we were less noticed. But now that there are so many startups in waste management, I think collectively we are asking for, a lot more solutions also to be built in this space. So I think that collectivism really helps in this space as well. So from our perspective, having just 2 or 3 people believe that a problem needs to be solved on top, is very encouraging. And it was heartening to see Jaya to point out all the challenges, because as she was recounting them, I was like, yeah, been there, done that. Bureaucrats changed on us. The system was rigged for a bigger company. We had no ED money to pay. So been through all of those challenges, but I think just having those 1 or 2 right policies and right people also works positively in the in our favor as well.
Thank you, Rashi. That was very candid and I think very helpful, because I'm sure there are a lot of people in the audience who are kind of asking some of these questions. So I'm sure it helped hearing from the horse's mouth. Manas?
Yeah, just same question.
Yes.
Yeah. I think they've covered so many things, right? I think it's important, as I said before, I think it's important to think through the next few years. And I know we have, entrepreneurship has come a long way in India over the last 8-10 years. It's become easier and easier to become an entrepreneur, more and more glamorous, more and more support. But I think there's a lot of support for your first, let's say the equivalent of your first 100 days, right? And then after that, the amount of support drops off very, very quickly and very sharply. And so either you can hang on to that early stage, getting pilot after pilot, incubation after incubation, award after award, or you find that, where do I get my capital from? How do I grow from here? And I think that's, from an ecosystem perspective, it's very important to fill that gap. And from an entrepreneur perspective, it's very important to walk in with your eyes open. And I still see too many entrepreneurs who get carried away for whatever reason, but I want to start something, I want to change the world, and they don't understand what they're getting themselves into. And sometimes it doesn't, it's not a happy journey. So I think there's some amount of awareness building, or sort of realism that does need to come in sometimes. As I said, I think the whole impact thing. Yes, maybe I'm one of the older ones, a little more jaded on this group, but I think one is, it's a business, right? If you want to be a business, it depends on how you think of yourself. If you want to be a business, you got to behave like a business. You have the option to become a non-profit, and that's a great way to go, right? There's phenomenal non-profits out there solving urban problems. And if you want to be a hybrid where you want to rely upon grants and so on for a certain period of time, okay, but don't get into a situation where you don't know which way you're going, and then you're looking for grants because you can't generate revenue, right? Because grants are also there to do things where revenue is not possible. And I think there are a lot of things that CSR should not be doing in terms of businesses. They should be funding NGOs to solve problems where there are no business solutions, where there are no revenue models also. So I think entrepreneurs, sometimes we need to be pragmatic about how we think about what we do, who we want to serve, where we want to earn our money. For me personally, being alive to fight another day is absolutely of paramount importance. There's no point going down flaming saying, I tried to change the world. Look, I'm a social entrepreneur, but I couldn't pay salaries and I couldn't sustain the business. I don't think there's usually much glory in that. Sometimes you try things, you fail. But I think generating revenue, having a mix of customers, is extremely important. And I think people need to think. I think in terms of support, what entrepreneurs need is serious, hard people who will ask them tough questions. I think a lot of people don't ask tough questions because they think I'm being rude, I'm being mean, I must, congratulate this young person who's trying to change the world. I think sometimes you're doing a disservice by doing that, right? By not telling them what the real world might look like, and maybe they'll escape that harshness. But if they don't, I think they'll be happy that somebody warned them or asked them tough questions on day one. If it discourages some people, so be it. But I think startups are tough. They're meant to be tough, and I think in some ways they ought to be tough, right? Because that's what builds the toughness to live through those fires, live through those trials. And I think if we expect it to be too easy, then we set ourselves up for failure down the road, where it might actually cause more harm in that case also. Having said that, I think government processes must help. I think, looking at big companies that can partner with small companies, use their technology. I think that's a great model for those who can do it. And I think there's just so much stuff going on. There's so many different, it's impossible to keep up with all the different models, all the different things that people are trying to do. And, I always say, look, India is, hands down, India is the most entrepreneurial country in the world. We have an entrepreneurial history, we have an entrepreneurial culture. And I think if you just let people solve problems, they will figure it out. But we do have a lot of systemic problems in the urban space. There is a lot of corruption. There are a lot of vested interests that don't want problems to be solved, right? And as founders and as entrepreneurs, you're often up against a lot of forces that don't want you to be successful, because there is rent seeking all over the place. And that's the reality of whether you work in waste management or water or things like that, or affordable housing. So I think the challenges are very real. And I think, let me say one more thing. I think team is very important. Okay, there's a study, this is way back 25 years ago, I was involved in a study at MIT, and we looked at entrepreneurs. We found solo entrepreneurs 5 years later, less than 20% had companies that are still alive. 2 co-founders, 35% chance they're still alive after 5 years. 3 co-founders, 45%. You get up to 5 co-founders and you have a 60-70% chance that your business is still thriving 5 years later. People don't sometimes want to give up equity. They want to retain control. They're fearful. These are all very valid concerns. But I think, again, the role of mentors and advisors to tell people, bring in co-founders, bring in your team, take your time, give equity to people. But I think team is very important. It's going to become more and more important as spaces heat up and as challenges grow. So that would be my other thing for entrepreneurs, is build a strong team from day one. It's not easy, but changing the world isn't.
Thank you, Manas. And I know Jaya has a hard stop at 5:30. So maybe one last question to just sum up her thoughts. And this is from somebody in the audience, which is, there's a lot of convincing that's required if you're in the civic tech space. I think we've all spoken about the long business development and also maybe sometimes diverse business development cycles. Any guidance, how can an entrepreneur or people starting on this journey kind of think about this ability to convince or things that they need to learn as they go ahead?
Yes, so I think the convincing needs to happen on both fronts, right? So if you're talking about government, for example, one is, clearly there's a need to build the capacity there. On creating, enforcing norms, how do you build awareness, and how do you make sure that they are doing the clear signaling that sustainability is important to them, that they're not just service providers for giving you water, giving you electricity, and taking the revenue, but that they have an eye on sustainability. So what kind of signaling can they do? Now, in Europe, for example, the EU, the European Commission has launched an initiative called the European Assistance for Innovation Procurement. And the idea is to train procuring agencies across Europe in innovative procurement. How do you do this better? How do you kind of use innovative methods? How do you onboard not just innovation, but innovation or innovative business models? Can we think of something like that in India? The second part of it is, how do you help them better procurement processes? That is clearly a problem across the board. And that is very important to address if we are going to be looking at government as an important player for civic tech agencies. So can we look at mainstreaming value for money principle in tendering? There are so many various ways in which you can look at this. The other part of it is, how do you capacitate startups on measuring and communicating impact better? What we found in many of our startups is that, while they have a sense of what they're doing and why they're doing it, I think the narrative, they didn't have the narrative right, which is why, a lot of them, were facing obstacles and roadblocks. So basically, you need to figure out how to measure and communicate your impact. And it needs to be beyond just sort of the environmental or the social impact that you're creating. It needs to be, accountable for much more. So how do you make it compelling? How do you make it comprehensible for, the various beneficiaries, the various stakeholders, and current and, potential funders? Now there are opportunities which have emerged, like the GEM, which is still work in progress. There is a spirit program that the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has been contemplating through their Smart Cities program. There's also through the Spirit program, which is basically a collaboration between Mahua Atal Innovation Mission and Startup India. So where they're looking at creation of an ecosystem of innovation in smart cities. One of the things that they're also looking at is creating a city office of innovation, which would act as a bridge between innovators and the various offices who need innovation or who are seeking services and solutioning. And they would act as this bridge. There are many countries outside which are already doing this. There's also an opportunity in the form of the social stock exchange, which is being designed to help social enterprises, raise funds, create liquidity, and all of that. So the point is that, I think the capacitating needs to happen on both ends, on the end of the, the startups on one side and on the government on both sides. And that's where I think organizations like, Social Alpha, what WRI is doing, I think we play a pivotal role, and Umid, RCI, we all play a pivotal role in kind of making that happen. So yeah, I will stop with that.
And with that, thank you so much for making time to speak with us today. And I guess we're kind of coming towards the end, so it'll be great to kind of just go around the room with Rashi, Malika, and Manas. I think is almost his closing thoughts, right? Where we have a bunch of people who have kind of gotten into the civic tech space on the call. And some of them might have got scared with all the challenges we showed them. But we're obviously all here because we care about the bigger picture. So as your closing thoughts on ideas or just advice on somebody who's starting on this journey, it'd be kind of good to hear from people who've been there and or who've supported others. So I'll start with you, Rashi.
Yeah. So, as you're thinking about your business model, just think that it's like you went to a restaurant, person A ordered a meal, person B came and ate it, and person C had to pay for it, right? That's exactly how government procurement works. So the beneficiary is someone completely different from the person who ordered the meal and the person who ate it, right? So nothing is aligned. The person who ate it might be cursing the person who ordered it for having ordered the exact wrong thing, and the person who paid for it is cursing both of them for having created this mess in the first place, right? So I think we really have to understand, are we working for the person who is paying, the person who's eating, or the person who's ordering? And I think the sooner we realize which of these three people are we working for, the easier it is for us to figure out our business model, the place we play in, so that we're only pleasing one person at a time, because it is impossible to please all three at the same time. So I think, I mean, that is my only, practical advice for anybody in this space, is pick who you're catering to, the payer, the eater, or the person ordering, and go and run with it, right? And figure out all the impact and all that in the process, but just pick one person and don't try to cater to all three.
Thank you, Rashi. Malika?
Yeah, I think Rashi's articulated it so well. I would also say that at the stage when you're really articulating your problem and your impact, I think pick one person who the customer that you'd like to serve. But I think just going beyond that, I think what is required is significant amount of investment in product development and iteration, because you are really focused on getting your customer satisfied with the kind of product that you are delivering. So from that point of view, yes, definitely reach out to the right ecosystem. Try to get your lab to market journey right in terms of how you can get the larger ecosystem support in enabling this. And I would say also picking up from what Manas said, and probably he'll also iterate on this further, but definitely get a strong team in place. If you are catering to the government, you definitely require very strong BD skills. So get the right people to be on board, who can really engage with the government in and out, to make the right kind of sales with the government. So that is extremely important. We have seen that varying across the startups, and while it is extremely founder driven as well, putting the right CXO team makes a huge difference to make the sales to the right customers. So yes, would like to just add that bit.
Thank you. Manis?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say at the end. I think I think Rashi's example I'm definitely going to use. That's very extremely apt, well put. I think dig in for the long haul. Know how you will survive. As entrepreneurs, I've been an entrepreneur. We tend to be over optimistic. We don't think about the worst case scenario. We don't know what the worst. Nobody could have predicted COVID, for example, right? But surround yourself with people who are a mixture of realism, pessimism, and optimism, so that you're keeping your ball on all the different possibilities that might happen. I think the founder, being a good manager, is extremely important, which means getting other people to get stuff done and move in a certain direction. Managing the team, it is not something we are taught how to do, even in business school, but managing teams, getting outcome, driving towards a goal is, being a good manager is very, very, very hard. And I think pursuit of excellence is critical. At a personal level, I would say keep your cost of living as low as possible for as long as possible. Make your dollar, make your rupee go as far as you can. Simplify your life. You'll be happier. You'll be a role model, and you will be more successful. And just keep an eye on who you're serving. I think that's extremely important. Especially if we are looking at serving the base of the pyramid, I think understanding them, being with them, understanding the way they live, and looking at the world through their eyes, I think is extremely important. At the same time, look, push the boundaries. I think there are a lot of that need to do jugaad and a need to scale up quickly. We become a copycat nation. We become a copycat society, right? Be ambitious. Today, for example, when I talk to urban agriculture, that's my new bee in the bonnet. I said, look, the goal of urban agriculture should be, can we get healthy fruits and vegetables from farm to plate within 24 hours at 50% of the current market prices for fruits and vegetables? Because today, healthy food is unaffordable for most people, right? So aeroponics, hydroponics, if you're going to supply, this is clean food at 20% above market price, forget it, doesn't matter, right? Can you get it down to half of market prices today? That's what we need to aim for. That's how we're going to make the world better. And that's why we need to use technology and our brains and our networks and our connections to make it happen. So somewhere in there, hopefully there's something useful for the founders out there.
I guess lots of things are useful. And in some ways, I think difficult to sum up all the great ideas that we heard, but something that really I think stood out for me was, this idea, the way Malika and Rashi kind of put it, just splitting the journey. That government is really when you have the product and you're ready to scale, which also means that you have the capacity to engage with a customer like that, with their cycles. I think this idea of kind of looking at diversification, but kind of doing that with some core principles of who you're serving, right? Not looking at diverse revenue patterns, which just might kind of confuse you and you don't have any business model working. So kind of building that strong core, diversifying on it, looking at different stages of your revenue essentially, right? Like what's going to make sure your product is safe, it's working. Then when you're kind of trying to look at scale, I think a lot of times scale is seen as linear, that like I have to keep doing more of this. I think the message I heard today really was that it's not linear scale. You might go from 1 to 10 in a certain way, but how you go to 1,000 might be a different. So kind of almost reimagining what scale is, not just as a multiplier, but really just as milestones. But with that, I think I'd really like to thank the panel. I think lots and lots of diverse views that came in. I know a bunch of things I want to ask all of you, so you'll be hearing from me. I found this panel to be really interesting. I think Civic Tech is one of those things that it's very close to everybody because we personally experience it, but it's also just such a mystery, right? Because it seems so big and daunting. So thank you for kind of breaking it up into small pieces and kind of helping us think through it. With that, I think I'll just, if I could call Shilpa to tell us a little bit more about some of the other activities that are happening as part of the lab.
Thank you, Charu. So as we all know, this hackathon is a 10-day guided journey from problem to solution from the lens of an entrepreneur. And in this brief but enriching experience, an aspiring entrepreneur identifies a problem statement, explores viable solution and business models for the same. So I like now quickly share my screen to share the various ideas our Civic Tech hackathon participants are working on. I hope my screen's visible.
Yes.
Since the sector of civic tech is quite vast, we have identified 9 to 10 problem statements, which our participating teams are working on. And further, these ideas have been categorized into 5 to 6 categories under which we have different themes. And so to begin with, the first category we have is building smart cities. Here we have one group. The theme they are working on is public place creation in urban areas. The problem statement, their problem statement or their idea is to collect data from every neighborhood to prepare a more dynamic, safe and functional street design plans. The next category we have is public health and data analytics. We have two groups here. The first group is working on the area of electronic health records and genetic database. Their problem statement being lack of user-friendly application, which contains easily analyzable HR data and genetic information in a structured format. So they want to develop an application from which this information can be leveraged to determine health status of communities and also to improve patient outcomes by facilitating real-world evidence studies. The next group we have under this category is working on geriatric and pediatric health, public healthcare systems, and they are working on developing an effective mechanism to monitor the progress and the supplementary nutritions that are dispersed and have all of these data in one place, which can then help the government bodies to make effective strategies and plans, which could further help in the eradication of malnutrition. The next category, the third category we have is public utilities or services. Again, two groups working here. I'm sorry, just give me a second. I think I've skipped one of the, sorry. The next category we have is civic rights information. And under this category, again, two groups. The theme for the first group is government accountability and citizens. And the problem statement or their idea is to develop a platform where citizens can discuss issues in their locality. And, it is going to be like a chat platform, which is with geotagged photos and voice notes. So they can keep adding to this platform. And once they identify an issue that involves that needs immediate remedies, they can then share this with the concerned authorities, local authorities, in the hope to get a swift resolution of the problem or the issue. The next group is working on the theme of civic information and consciousness, and they're trying to address the absence of a single consolidated information platform, which makes which helps the citizens to keep updated with local area alerts and upcoming developments in the nearby areas or neighborhood. The next category we have is greenhouse gas emission and climate change. Again, two groups in this category. The first group is working on the theme of vertical gardens in metros, and with that, the mitigation of GHG emissions. So as they have identified that urban indoor pollution is becoming an inevitable problem and needs to be solved immediately. So with the help of designing, creating vertical gardens, we can mitigate the GHG emissions in metros. The next group we have in this category is working on the theme of indoor air pollution and purification for slums. They intend to develop an indoor air pollution device with the help of technology, which can be installed in slums and lower income strata areas and groups, and also large public spaces, so that indoor air pollution can be minimized. The second last category we have is public utilities or services. Again, two themes we have here. The first group is working on the theme of waste segregation and management. They intend to develop a reward-based application to create competitive environment, which can help in the segregation of waste in smart bins for handovers. The next group is working in the area of industrial wastewater and sewage treatment. And their plan is to develop a cheaper and eco-friendly alternative to chemical-based wastewater treatments. Lastly, the last category we have is geospatial technology for citizens, one group under this category, and they're working on the theme of early fire smoke detection and prevention of forest fires. Their idea is to develop a geospatial satellite that tracks discrepancy in the forests through image processing and further sends drones with smoke detectors. And this satellite could also be capable of sending alerts to the station for action to prevent fire losses. These are the broad categories and themes and problem statements or ideas we have, which our hackathon participants are currently working on. Much.
This looks fantastic. Thank you, Shilpa. And with that, I think I also just want to extend my gratitude and thank the CI team for putting this together, for running the hackathon. I think it's been fabulous in terms of just the number of activities and things that they've planned. And our hope is that we'll kind of, the great ideas that we've heard today, we'll be able to take them much beyond the circles that you already hear about, right? Much beyond the Delhi and the Bombays and the Bangalores. Because really, urban isn't just the 4 cities or the 100 cities, it's really those 4,000. And as in every other sector, we say, right, that the problem of Delhi is not the problem of a Lucknow or a Kanpur or a Satara. And that's going to be true when we think of Civic Tech. So with that, I think thank you very much. And thank you for all the audience for staying with us. It was lovely having everyone here. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Chal. I'll close this session now.
Snehal, can we leave?
Yeah, I'm just figuring out. Amreen, can you see the option of ending the call? I can see the option of leaving meeting.
Swaroop might be the host and might have to do it.
Wait, let me just check. I think
Yeah, he's not there right now.
I think we all can leave. I think they'll close it.
But yeah, I mean, feel free to.
Yeah, Charu, Manas, Malika,
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you so
Thanks
much,
a lot
Manas.
for joining.
Thank you, Malika.
Thank you, Manas. Thank you, Malika.
So I'm the co-host, but I'm not able to close the session.
Snehal, I also don't see the option of closing it.
I think we
And
all
we are
just
live.
have to leave.
Sure, sure. Okay, I get the. I think I see the option.
Mm.